So before we begin graphing our sine function, I just wanted to go over some vocab that's pretty essential to this. So a period is one cycle of a graph, and in our case, for a sine function, the full period is 2 pi, and then we'll be graphing two whole periods. We also have amplitude, which is the distance from the sinusoidal axis to top or bottom. And then within the equation, we have A, B, H, and K. And A is a vertical stretch or compression. B is a horizontal stretch or compression. H is a horizontal translation, which is like left or right. And K is the vertical translations, up and down. So our first step is to find our A, B, H, and K values. And we can find that by looking at the standard form. The standard form is y equals A sine B and then in parentheses x minus h plus k. So the equation that we're going to be doing is y equals 3 sine 2x minus pi plus 1. So our a value is always in front of the sign. So our a value in this case is 3. In order to find a b value, we have to factor it out. So we would factor out 2. So it'd be 2. And then x minus, and then we would divide the pi by 2. So that would be pi divided by 2. So our b value is 2. And then we got our h value also by factoring it out. So our h value is pi over 2. And then lastly, our k value is at the end, and our k value is 1. So now we have our a, b, h, and k values. Okay, so now our second step is to find our amplitude and our period. So a period is the one cycle of a graph, and in our case we'll be graphing 2 periods. But to find just one period, we have to you do 2 pi over the absolute value of b. That's your period. So in our case, we would do 2 pi divided by 2. And after you simplify that, that gets you to just pi. And that is one full cycle on this function, on this equation. Next, to find the amplitude, that's just the absolute value of a. And the amplitude is the distance from the sinusoidal axis to the top or the bottom. That's the highest value. And in this case, that's the absolute value of 3, which is just 3, and that's our amplitude. Okay, our next step is to find the tick mark length of the graph. And so when you graph it, you usually have 4 tick marks, and the fourth one is the full cycle or period. So in order, it's really easy to find the tick mark length. And all you have to do is take your period and divide that by 4, because there's 4 marks. And so that would be pi divided by 4, and you can't simplify that. So this is our tick mark length. Okay, so now we can actually start drawing and labeling our graph. So first, you want to label your k value. So our k value is 1, and this is our sinusoidal axis. And then for the amplitude, you go 3 up and 3 below. So 3 up, so you'd add 3 plus 1, and that's 4. So that's our highest the graph will go. And then you would subtract 3 from 1, and that's negative 2. And then you would label your tick marks, but we'll get to that in the next step. Now we're going to start labeling our x-axis. And so the first thing to do is you would label your full cycles. And since we're going to draw 2 periods, we have 1 right here, so that's our pi. and then you multiply that by 2, and that's 2 pi. So all we have to do is fill in the marks in between. As we did it earlier, we had the width, and the width was pi over 4. So that's the value I would start off with. That's the one. Pi over 4. And then you just keep on adding pi over 4 until you get to pi. So pi over 4 plus pi over 4 is 2 pi over 4. And that can simplify to pi over 2. And then you would add on pi over 4 to that, and that's 3 pi over 4. And then you have pi, or it could be 4 pi over 4, and you would add pi over 4 to that, and that would be 5 pi over 4. And then you would add on pi over 4 to that, and that can simplify to 3 pi over 2. And then add on pi over 4 to that, and that's 7 pi over 4. And now you have all your tick marks, and now we can begin to actually start plotting our points and graphing. Okay, our last and final step is plotting our points and then connecting them. So this is where our horizontal shift comes into place, and that our horizontal shift is right here, pi over 2. So we would plot that where we would plot that on the sinusoidal axis. So that's 1. So because k is 1 and h is pi over 2. And then how do we know what way it's going, if it's decreasing or increasing? Well, typically a sine function alternates from increasing to decreasing. So our maximum value would be at 3 pi over 4, and that would be up here. And then when you have these two values, you can just go ahead and plot the points. And now we can connect them. And we now have our final graph, and yeah, this is y equals 3 sine and 2x minus pi plus 1.